We're going to start with Ron Hextall as general manager, and I believe Brian Burke as president of hockey ops. Can you run us through what you know about the hiring process there? We obviously saw Mike Gillis's presentation. Was it the PowerPoint that won Penguins ownership over, or was it something else that Ron Hextall brought in that got Mario Lemieux and the whole group to get on board with it?
I honestly guess they went into this thinking that it was going to be Ron Hextall. I think he was a front runner from the word go. There was just something about, I think, his ability to build a team and acknowledging, the Penguins cupboard. There's bare, and then your cupboard got ripped out of the wall, and there's not even anywhere to store food. That's kind of where the Penguins are from a prospect perspective. So we know that Hextall can acquire talent, and I think just the familiarity they had from him with his time in Philadelphia. They brought Brian Burke in as an advisor to the hiring process, which I don't think anyone knew was going on behind the scenes. That was kind of the big surprise, not just that he had himself kind of gotten hired after that, but he was kind of serving as sort of their counsel, I guess, if you will, throughout the process. But I guess it's not that surprising if we think back, and there's been rumors even into last year that they wanted to bring Dale Talon in that role, and that fell through. And I don't know if that's a Jim Rutherford thing or what. So they've sort of been searching for someone that can build this functional hockey ops department from the ground up. And in that sense, probably haven't gotten anybody better.
Well, look at where the Philadelphia Flyers are right now. It's got to stick in every Flyers fan's craw that Ron Hextall is GMing the Pittsburgh Penguins. I do want to ask, why did they choose Brian Burke for a role that never previously existed?
I think his experience on the administrative side. I think that ultimately the Penguins have had a lot of shuffling going on in this front office, and Jason Carmanos was one guy that left, a little over a year ago now, and it was really a big void. He was responsible for quite a bit there, and Jim Rutherford walking away 8 days into the season aside, I still think that was a void that just was never filled. So where a lot of teams have, really highly functional hockey operations departments that are, in tune with what they're doing from a scouting perspective, from a budgeting perspective, from, tying all these arms of the business together. I think it's a fair question to say, do the Penguins have that? And if they're looking for somebody to build it, from a connections perspective, just a name power perspective, Brian Burke is kind of the perfect man to do it. And I think the initial shock from Penguins fans was, one, this is Brian Burke. Two, he's had a lot of really loud things to say about the Penguins process and, is their window closed? And you reconcile that, I think. And then the third was, is he making decisions here from a roster perspective? I think there was an initial sort of fear. And once it became clear that he himself had helped to identify Ron Hextall as sort of the leading candidate, that everybody was sort of like, oh, okay, there's no way that's going to happen now. He's not going to go in there and railroad the guy that he just hired, and then we kind of started to piece it together from there. But I think once it wore off and the shock kind of went away, people were like, okay, if we're looking for a guy to build a hockey operations department, we've done all right.
I don't think the Penguins make these two hires without properly identifying what they want. And I got to say, I'm really confused. Because like you mentioned with the prospects, I think it was Kalen Addison in the Zucker trade,
Philip Hollander.
The Philip Hollander, and then the 15th overall pick coming to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But there's also this thing with money, and they're trying to save. What do the Penguins want?
To stay competitive, Steve, I think is the ultimate answer to that question. I don't think anything they could do to prevent the perceived window from shutting is of the utmost importance to them right now. And that's honestly the first thing that Ron Hextall and Brian Burke said. This team, we believe, has the makeup of a team that can win. And it's not all that far removed from doing it. We still feel like the star players can do it. We're not going to break this band up. We want to evaluate what we have and move forward to try to make it better. So I think that's encouraging, right? If you're in the win now mode, and everybody in Pittsburgh, I think, is fearful of what comes next for this franchise in the sort of dark days, quote unquote, to come post Crosby and Malkin. Anyone who can soften that by rebuilding the cupboard while simultaneously not sacrificing any more of what's in there, which is really at this point 2 goalies, Sam Polan and Nathan Legary. That's it. That's all that's in there. So the pickings are slim already, but anybody that can hold on to those pieces and try to continue this train rolling uphill, that's kind of what they wanted.
The question I think that's still on everybody's mind, and I'm sure it's clear as mud, but can you give us your best rundown of what happened in the final days of Jim Rutherford and what the reason was for him walking away from a team where he won 2 Stanley Cups 9 days or 8 days into the season?
So it's important to acknowledge too that like we're having a conversation now that's not, I don't think, really happening as much in Pittsburgh. Which is intriguing to me, right? Because you don't hear people say Jim Rutherford quit on the team 8 days into the season. It's sort of like this danced around topic, and maybe that's something that, is the benefit of winning. Certainly I'm sure that carries weight to it. But I think it was a disconnect. But for me, again, from a hierarchy perspective, in terms of, what Jim Rutherford was, more or less doing from a grand vision perspective. How involved with it was he? How involved did he want to be in it? Was he in a position where he had his sort of quote unquote people around? There was a lot of discussion of, he wanted to trade Chris Letang and, got shot down from Mario. And we don't have there's no, real evidence to suggest that this was over a trade or one particular move. I mean, the day, leading up to this, there were personnel decisions that were going to have to be made for injuries. And, I just don't think that it was something that there was one thing that led up to it. I think there was just over time, just sort of the separation between ownership and he, and as his camp sort of got smaller and smaller, I think maybe that wore on him over time.
There were some suggestions out there that this might have had something to do with there were accusations made against members of I think it was the Penguins or their AHL affiliates coaching
AHL
staff.
affiliate, yeah.
Do you get any sense?
No.
And what were the accusations, just for anybody that doesn't know them?
Yeah, so regarding a coach down there and some allegations of abuse, and the question really it was handled ultimately after a time, not I think as swiftly or as publicly as you'd have liked at all. And the question, I think, from Steve's perspective, was this tied to that? And was the ongoing investigation that is sort of happening and sort of things continuing to come to light with it on whether or not the overall parts in reporting this up the chain of command worked? Jim Rutherford, I think, was kind of just open with that from the get. There's not much he's not open about. He was frank about it from the beginning. I think, in talking about it, that's the thing, we haven't heard a ton, right? But what we have heard from him, is just acknowledgments that he was aware and, did what he thought was appropriate. So I don't think anyone gets the sense that is involved here either, as much as it is just sort of that friction over time.
Now, when we talk about some of the moves he's made and why the cupboard's bare, you mentioned the Kasperi-Kapanen trade. We can mention the Jason Zucker trade. How do you feel like those trades have worked out? If we're talking about a team that's trying to keep the competitive window open, it makes sense to trade first, seconds, and draftees to get established NHL players to play on the big lines. Obviously, we're quite familiar with Kasperi-Kapanen in Toronto. Jason Zucker, for anybody in Minnesota, was, a big part of the team for a while and then almost traded and then not traded. And his wife was pissed, and I'm sure he was too. And, that was public. How have those additions worked out? And, the Pittsburgh Penguins are sitting 5-5, fifth in the division right now. What are the Pittsburgh Penguins? What is their identity as it stands? And is this going to be good enough?
Well, it's right now it's messy. I think that it's been a really difficult to get a pulse on this team. It's been a bizarre year for Evgeny Malkin. I think at the very start, it was very un-Malkin-like, not only from an eye test perspective, even analytically. Through the first 5-6 games of the season, I love game score as a stat that can kind of sum up a player's performance, whether it be in one game or over time. Right after the first week and a half, Malkin's game score had him 371st in the National Hockey League, which kind of matched what we saw on tape. Now that's changed and he's kind of coming along, but it's been Chris Letang who's been struggling now. John Marino hasn't really picked up where he left off from his phenomenal rookie season. So it's been a bucket of issues. I think the power play, is probably number one on the hit list in Pittsburgh right now. Kasperi Kapanen, believe it or not, I think you guys will appreciate this. I really struggled to reconcile your opinions with Kasperi Kapanen and about the way he thought the game and whether or not he could kind of keep up with things sort of quote unquote mentally with Sidney Crosby. And I think it was my concern. We know that the physicality is there. He's got great hands. The straight line speed exists, but it's when the play deviates off the beaten path and you've got to make quick decisions that it seems like it doesn't come together. And, we haven't even had to really search for an answer to that because he's just either, he came over late, had the visa issue, got his feet wet on the fourth line, but has just really had this nice marriage with Evgeny Malkin. And if you think about it, both of those players just play the same style of hockey. It's kind of physical, north. They don't overthink it. They freewheel a little bit. But he's been a bit of a puck retriever. He's been a bit of a trigger man on that line. And it's just seemed like a home for him where he doesn't have to sort of be in that mental space to do too much. It's, you're playing with Jason Zucker and Evgeny Malkin, just go out there and, Malkin does a lot of the work himself. So that's been encouraging. But I think if you go down the line, I mean, we mentioned, there was a time not that long ago, where a guy like Oscar Sundqvist was just a prospect for the Penguins and he got traded for Ryan Reeves, right? So you kind of scratch your head at that one. But at the same time, you've got John Marino on the roster, who's one of the best defensemen, in my opinion, in the National Hockey League last year. Pierre-Olivier Joseph right now is the absolute revelation for the Penguins, literally keeping them afloat. And he came over in the Phil Kessel trade that, a lot of people thought was not going to reap that much. So it's a mixed bag. I think that's sort of the story of Jim Rutherford's whole history, right? There's stuff we can reflect on and say was great. And then there's Patrick Hornquist right now in Florida. So, that's kind of the way it worked.